President of the United States has commuted the sentence of one Roger Stone on Friday. It's led some people to be outraged, mostly the president's opponents. That includes Senator Mitt Romney, who made this out to be an historic abuse of presidential power. What did you think of it?
I thought it was expected. The treatment of Roger Stone is nothing short of constitutionally and legally an embarrassment for the Mueller team and the Justice Department at the time under Obama and others, and including the Rosenstein regime. Let's remember what happened. There was no evidence of any collusion between the Russians and the Trump people, President Trump or his campaign. This effort to indict Roger Stone was designed to put pressure on him not to tell the truth, but to lie, to make up things about the president. This was a tactic that the Mueller people used throughout their investigation. And it's rather rich to listen to Robert Mueller write an op-ed piece and complain that everything that they did was kosher. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The Mueller investigation was an assault on the rule of law, an assault on the dignity of the Justice Department and its years of truly good law enforcement, which was degraded under the Obama administration and carried on by Mueller at the beginning of the Trump administration. Roger Stone deserved clemency. I would not have advised him to have gone up and testified before Congress. I think he's a bit of a smarty pants, and there are a lot of people who were just lying in wait for him, and it was dumb for him to do what he did. But he didn't deserve what he got, and he certainly didn't deserve the kind of trial that he got in the District of Columbia, where Amy Berman Jackson, who presided over his trial, was so, some of the things that she said in that courtroom about him and about the case and about the president were truly remarkable for a federal judge. And then when she refused to grant him a new trial, when the forewoman of the jury was proven to have lied during her voir dire or jury examination, I think Judge Jackson showed her true colors. She wasn't a judge in these circumstances. She was a Democrat, and it was really another embarrassing moment for the federal bench on top of Judge Sullivan. So we're watching some pretty bad stuff here, and Roger Stone deserved clemency, and he got it in a commutation.
Now, it's not just Mitt Romney, who, of course, has spoken out against the president quite often these days, who's against this. It was also the Attorney General. Attorney General Barr said, or at least reports have pointed to him not agreeing with this decision. What do you make of the AG allegedly saying, hey, this isn't something I would have pushed forward?
Well, I can understand that. Remember, the Attorney General has a job to do, and his job is to make sure that the Department of Justice is running properly. He believes that the Stone case was justified, that even though the sentence that was sought by the Mueller people was excessive, that the conviction, in his opinion, running the Department of Justice was justified. It doesn't bother me that Bill Barr thought there shouldn't be a commutation. He's saving his fire for the big stuff, which is the Durham investigation. So he doesn't want to spend political capital making excuses for Roger Stone. I think he did exactly the right thing for an attorney general who's in the position that he's in. And, he didn't need that fight. And besides, it was irrelevant. The president was going to do what he wanted to do anyway, so he said something just to protect himself.
Real quick, I want to move to Mike Flynn in a moment and find out what you think of the chances of the president doing the same for General Flynn. But first on Mueller, we saw Lindsey Graham on Sunday indicated that he does want to call Robert Mueller to testify before his panel about his investigation into, quote, Russian interference. Are you pleased with that? Should Mueller testify before the Senate?
Oh, I'd be delighted to have Bob Mueller come back again and display the type of behavior that he did in his House hearing. That was a disaster for the Democrats. By the way, he doesn't have to ask Mueller to come up, Lindsey Graham. He can subpoena him. There's no reason to have this nicety. Mueller writes an op-ed piece defending his conduct and that of his minions in the Stone case. Bring him up. What's the big deal? Slap a subpoena on him. Don't wait for him. But who knows what Lindsey Graham will do? We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, Lindsey Graham often more bark than bite. On the issue of General Flynn, should the president follow suit and pardon General Flynn, given that the legal torture that that Judge Emmett Sullivan continues to put Flynn through continues?
Well, he shouldn't pardon him now. He should not pardon him now. He should let this legal process run through, whatever it's going to take. Michael Flynn is not going to spend one day in jail. Everyone knows the president can pardon him in a New York minute if he chooses to do so. What's important is for the legal process, which has already started to destroy Judge Sullivan, continue. I understand that this is an affront to everybody. It is a disgrace that it continues. It is a disgrace what Judge Sullivan is doing. He should be dismissing the case. It's clear that he's trying to get a petition for rehearing granted because, as you know, as a matter of law, well, actually people don't know this, once the petition for rehearing is granted, if it were to be granted, the 2-to-1 opinion would be vacated and would no longer be the law. And then if they decided to write another opinion reversing the panel, that would be the law of the circuit. But I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to grant a petition for rehearing in this case. And I think the reason is that the end game doesn't get them anything, because if it's sent back down for a hearing in front of Judge Sullivan, the Justice Department is not going to provide him with any more information than they already have in their motion to dismiss. They're going to say, Your Honor, that's it. That's all you're getting. And it ends up in the Supreme Court. And, you know, that'll be through the election. And if nothing happens, and if Trump loses, he pardons Flynn. If he wins, they let the process play out. But I think Judge Sullivan is playing a very dangerous and partisan game, and I think he is, once again, dragging the district court into a corner where it shouldn't be. But, you know, all bets are off when you're dealing with Trump. The federal judges in this country have gone nuts. They are hurting the federal courts. They are demeaning the federal courts. Nothing that Trump has done with regard to the federal courts matches anything that the federal courts have done to themselves in dragging themselves into politics. It's just like the press. When Trump calls the press the enemy of the people, the real answer is the press is the enemy of itself. And the same thing is true of the federal courts. They are their own worst enemies.
Well, we're trying to get to the bottom of who's working against the American people. John Durham is doing that very thing. I want to ask you more about what you expect from the Durham investigation in just a moment. A lot more questions for Joe DiGenova. Hang tight. Speaking with former U.S. Attorney Joe DiGenova, as we so often do. Joe, the Durham investigation, the John Durham investigation, the U.S. Attorney up in Connecticut continues as he looks into the people responsible for advancing this Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy theory hoax with inside the government. There are charges expected in that case. Now that we're in July, almost the middle of July, what are you expecting from John Durham?
Well, I think people have to understand that any type of white-collar criminal investigation, and certainly this one where you have presidential power at stake, you have a conspiracy to overturn a national election, there's all sorts of things that he has to do that you wouldn't do in an ordinary investigation. So even though that's taking a lot of time, this investigation is moving at warp speed. Now, what you want to do in a case like this is you want to start off with some guilty pleas. You want to get some minor players to admit that they did certain things wrong. Like, let's say Kleinsmith, the guy who falsified the application in the Carter Page case by putting down that Carter Page was not an asset of the CIA when in fact he was. That's the kind of case you want to start with out of the gate. I expect there to be indictments, I would think, before the end of the summer, and I would think it would be in the interest of the Durham investigation to have some indictments or some guilty pleas before the end of the summer and before the election. I think that's the plan, and I think that will happen.
And do you think that along that timeline, that if we don't see anything by the end of summer, that is going to point to after the elections, for fear that people are going to think that the Durham investigation is being politicized and trying to turn an election on November 3rd?
Well, I think you can't use that type of logic if you're Durham. You can't think that way. You have to bring indictments when they're ready, regardless of the timing. As long as it doesn't involve one of the candidates for president, nothing should prevent the criminal justice system from proceeding. These cases are about something that happened in 2016 and even before that. Remember, this election really is somewhat about this investigation, because there was a coup attempt against Donald Trump before the election. Let's just remember, we just celebrated July 5th, the 4th anniversary of the famous James Comey news conference where he exonerated Hillary Clinton.
Right.
That was not an accident. That was part of a plan. And the plan was to exonerate her, and if she lost the election, to frame Donald Trump.
Joe,
and that's exactly what they did.
Let me ask you for some clarity on the relationship between the Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney, in this case, John Durham. Because we saw some reports from Fox News, for instance, in the past week, that Durham might, to Beverly's point, quote, punt until after the 2020 election if the investigation's not done by the end of the summer. Although, as you just pointed out, we've heard Bill Barr say that because none of these investigations involve a candidate for president, there is no reason any of them should be delayed. So would Bill Barr's judgment here win out, or could John Durham actually punt this thing?
Well, Bill Barr's judgment would win out as a matter of law and authority, but Bill Barr would not want to have a conflict with Durham if Durham felt he wasn't ready. I do not believe those reports, even though it is true that there has been delay in Durham's investigation because of the coronavirus. They've been doing stuff all along. They've been doing most of their work in Connecticut, apparently, very little of it in Washington, D.C. And I don't expect there to be any delay unless just Durham isn't ready. Now, who knows? I mean, it could be that they agree everything's going to happen after the election. I just don't see that, because this is central. This investigation is actually part of the election. It's absolutely vital that this be done. And done
in other
now.
words, all of the politicizing's already occurred. Now they're trying to untangle it. Let me also ask about something going on politically with the president. The Supreme Court last week issued a 7-2 ruling saying that the Manhattan District Attorney, Cyrus Vance, his subpoena for the president's financial records must be honored. What is the precedent that is being set here?
That's a pretty bad decision by the Supreme Court. All previous subpoenas to the president have involved subpoenas from federal grand juries or congressional committees. This is the first time that a state investigative subpoena has been ruled to be proper against the president. Now, what they did rule is they said he doesn't get the records. Cy Vance, doesn't get the records right away. He has to go back in the court, and the president will be allowed to interject all sorts of, Fifth Amendment, attorney-client privilege, all sorts of privileges he can assert. But let's remember what is being sought here. Cy Vance is not seeking official records of the President of the United States. He's going back 8 years to seek financial records of the President as a private citizen in his dealings as a hotelier and as a builder. It's really quite remarkable, and I think the Supreme Court made a horrendous decision saying that there's no difference. Can you imagine if a George Soros prosecutor, like this woman in St. Louis, Kim Gardner, decided she wanted to investigate President Trump for no good reason? The court says, there are remedies for that. He can file a motion. He can go to federal court. Well, thanks a lot, Supreme Court. Just what a sitting president needs is to be hectored by some nut Soros-generated prosecutor out in the hinterland. This is a very bad decision. The two dissenters, Alito and Justice Thomas, had it absolutely right. What Justice Roberts has opened up in this case is a disaster for all future presidents.
And real quick, timing-wise on this, any chance that this information, the financial records, will come out before election?
No, and in the companion case, the House of Representatives, quote-unquote, won. They didn't win. The court said the president doesn't have to produce any of those records, and they sent that back to the federal courts for more hearings, which would take into account separation of powers, presidential privileges. The same thing is going to hold true in the Vance case. Neither Cy Vance nor the House committees will get any of these records before the election. But that's what they wanted. They wanted to get these records so they could use them politically. It's not going to happen. Everything will wait till after the election.
It makes it easy for us to do comprehensive coverage of all these legal issues when people like Joe DiGenova have such comprehensive knowledge. Thank you, Joe.